An elitist group of leaders of some of the world's most industrialized economies with neither standing nor authority or power to impose or enforce their decisions on the world, or a crucial platform for international economic cooperation that has saved the world from major financial calamity since the 2008 financial crisis. Whatever your views are, the G20 has come a long way and makes decisions that affect us all. We are exactly 75 days away from the G20 Leaders Summit to be held in South Africa. And for the next 3 months, G20 Focus will be your guide and information hub, seeking to break down the complex issues that the G20 is grappling with the help, of course, of leading local and international newsmakers and subject matter specialists. Good evening and welcome to the premiere episode of G20 Focus. I'm Thulasizwe Simelane. Well, there's definitely a sense of hype in South Africa about the G20. But what is the G20? Well, take a look at these numbers. 85% of the world's GDP is generated among G20 countries. G20 countries also account for 60% of the world's trade, and 63% of the world's population lives in G20 countries, including, of course, South Africa. So let's get into this then. My guests this evening are Dr. Philani Mthembu, Executive Director at the Institute for Global Dialogue. We also have Ambassador Xolisa Mabongo, South Africa's G20 sous Sherpa, and on our virtual platform we'll be joined by William Carew, who is head of the Secretariat of the AU's Economic, Social and Cultural Council, ECOSOCC. Mr. Carew, let me bring you into this conversation from the perspective of the African Union, of which ECOSOCC is, of course, an advisory body. What's your best explanation for someone who asks you what sets the G20 apart from formalized, structured international organizations that are known, for instance, to have a fully fledged administration as opposed to this being a forum?
Thank you very much. I think it's very important to note that the G20 is widely regarded as the main council for managing global economy, like colleagues, panelists have rightly said. While you look at the United Nations having a broader membership of about 193 countries, it is often too large and politically divided when it comes to making swift economic decisions. And therefore, the G20, like you rightly said in your introduction, representing 85% of global GDP and 75% of international trade, and more significantly, 2/3 of the world population, you will definitely agree with me that it is mostly the most influential economic steering committee in the continent. And therefore, the African Union participation actually gives the continent what I would call a single voice at key global discussion, especially when you look at the geopolitical context and more fundamentally the dynamics where nations and communities are becoming insular. And less open to outside influences. So I think looking at it from that multipolar world perspective, several nations are now competing and interacting in various fronts, either at the political level, the economic level, military level, or cultural level. So the context itself provides that reality and dynamics that African priorities such as debt relief, such as climate financing, such as issues related to vaccine infrastructure, need to be discussed. And therefore, the African Union coming in provides an opportunity for partnership and more specifically targeted support that's geared towards addressing some of these issues.
Mr. Carew, maybe you can come in on this one. How is an organization, well, a formation, a platform, able to act decisively in the light of crises when it's not a fully fledged organization such as the AU, for example, which has a secretariat and other entities such as the one that you head up? What is it that enables the G20 to take decisions such as those that were taken in 2008, as well as during the COVID-19 pandemic? Give me some examples where G20 decision-making has been felt on the ground on the continent.
I think it's very critical, first and foremost, to be able to establish the fact that there are no legal enforcement power. And I think that is what colleagues have been trying to clearly indicate. But it basically relies on political will. It relies on what I would want to say peer pressure and the muscle of its members to deliver.
Yeah.
So the influence, in my view, comes from the agenda setting. The agenda setting is very significant in terms of mobilizing finances through institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, and more fundamentally, the reputational pressure to follow through some of these agreed decisions or action based on the agenda setting. So its influence basically derived from the political will and the mutual interest of its members to cooperate. So therefore, this is what I see. It can be a weakness when consensus is normally difficult to achieve, especially on decisive issues. But it is also, like my colleague said, it is its greatest strength, allowing it to have that flexible and candid platform for dialogue to be able to address critical issues that affect the continent. Let me land on this. When we look at the geopolitical realities and the fact that some of the issues that currently affect Africa as a continent, and Africa are not seated in the table where decisions are taken on critical issues that confront or affect Africa, then it becomes a major challenge. But with African Union now and South Africa being on board, then you have an opportunity in terms of partnership to be able to lobby and advocate so that you can be able to make decisions in the best interest of the African people.
All right. Mr. Carew, let me come to you. In terms of alignment between what the G20 is trying to achieve on the global stage, on the host of issues that we've been discussing this evening, how does it align with what the African Union is seeking to do as spelled out in the AU's Agenda 2063, for example?
I think what is more fundamental here is the fact that the African Union is talking about achieving as a continent. And therefore, if we want to achieve a sustainable economic development as a continent, we need to be able to have a common position as African Union. And when we look at the geopolitical realities, especially issues related to the reform of the UN Security Council, the reform of the financial architecture, like my colleagues were talking about, these are areas where we are significantly constrained, especially from the point of Africa not being on the table when some of these critical decisions are taken, and yet still they pertain significantly to the African population. Therefore, having a platform such as the G20, having an opportunity, I think what we are looking at is to be able to have a backed outcome, which will basically look at how we address commitments, such as issues related to the debt crisis that colleagues have been talking about, following up on pledges, and then also be able to demand for accountability through leveraging on this partnership that we have established. So I think it's a win-win situation, in my view, the fact that you can leverage on an informal, less well-structured in terms of this old diplomatic and strong kind of bureaucratic processes in making decisions. So this is something that African Union and the African member states can leverage in terms of unlocking some of the challenges that we are currently confronted with at the multilateral stage.
I hope you all realize just how fascinating you've made the next conversation that we're going to have in the next few minutes about avoiding being eclipsed by geopolitics when we have the leaders meeting. I hope you realize how interesting you've framed that discussion, given what you have said about the effectiveness of the less formal approach of the G20. Mr. Carew, let me bring you in then. What's your reflection of the impact South Africa's presidency of the G20 has had broadly for the continent in driving some of these issues around not only relying on aid, but also issues of trade, as well as the new emerging themes of what will drive the economy, the endowment of the African continent, for instance, in critical minerals, but also ensuring that that's beneficiated at source without being, exported as raw commodities?
I think South Africa has played a critical leadership role, and we need to be able to acknowledge that, especially when you look at the rise in geopolitical tension, and more fundamentally, the fragmentation, which basically have threatened multilateralism. So I think South Africa has played a critical role. What you will look at in terms of how this has played out, especially in terms of aligning to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we've seen that the whole conversation within the G20 has gone and expanded beyond economics. It now serves as a key forum where we discuss world most pressing issues. So we are talking about critical minerals, we're talking about climate change and energy transition, we're talking about global health, like my colleagues were talking about, in terms of how do we coordinate pandemic, in terms of preparedness and response. We're talking about digitalization and even taxation, which you also spoke about. We're talking about how we align the sustainable development. And one thing which is very critical is the ability and the conversation around addressing inequality and other social issues, which are now way beyond the whole aspect of economics. And these are critical issues which at the multilateral stage, where we have structured institutions, we are finding it difficult to have a breakthrough. And therefore, the role of South Africa playing a leadership role within the G20 and having the African Union coming on board, I think is critical. And this will go a very long way in paving way for conversation regarding the reforms that we are pursuing at the multilateral stage. Let's
pause then for a moment. I know that I've promised you that we'll get to the crux of geopolitics. We'll do that up next. This is G20 Focus on SABC News. Welcome back. It's been a fascinating discussion. Let me pick it up as we draw to a close. With Mr. Carew, let me pick it up with you. Talk to me about what your reflections are about what would make this upcoming Leaders Summit to be successful and cementing all of the work we've been describing that has been happening in the last 12 months or thereabouts of South Africa's presidency. What will mark it as a successful G20 summit?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we need to understand that with the rising geopolitical tension and the shifting power dynamics, some of the issues in terms of participation at what level, these are realities that are abound. But what is more critical in my view, when we look at where Africa is today, and some of the call for a new world order, looking at issues related to reform of the financial architecture, reform of the UN Security Council with regards to even Article 109 and the likes, and all the concerns that we are talking about, I think we have a golden opportunity as Africa. One, the fact that it is being hosted in South Africa. Two, that South Africa is playing a leading role. Three, the opportunity that we have that the African Union is now part of the G20 for us to be able to advocate for some of the critical issues that the continent is confronted with. And I think until we're able to have an outcome that is clearly addressing some of these concerns within the African continent at the multilateral stage, that will be a positive outcome in my view. Until Africa able to advocate for some of the critical issues that is affecting them related to debt relief, restructuring of the debt, and all these reforms that we are talking about.